Hello, Mrs. Furey, thank you for coming to the ICD and for the excellent lecture you gave upstairs. And we would love to ask you some follow-up questions based on your lecture. In your opinion, which forms of environmental activism do you consider to have the most potential in raising awareness within the broader public? And with the recent economic crisis, how do you make public and the private sector acknowledge the importance of sustainable development?
Well, I think the best activism is to get young people involved. I mean, really from little up, because they love if they're taught about nature, they love it, or they will love it and protect it. And if they understand it's being damaged, it's like their friend being hurt. So I think that is where we should start, and young little to all ages really, because many of us are young at heart, hopefully. I think that's very important. As for the activism and the society, it's a difficult situation because the press needs to be much more on the side of the environment, as we know, to get more action. I think that a lot of people are, television drugged. They don't realize, they don't take it in. You know, the planet is being murdered in a way, but they're also used to watching human beings being murdered. So it's a very difficult situation to really move. So perhaps young people and active people to support them, and to do our best to make everybody come together, because we all need to work together. That's the difficult thing. And I think the other thing, of course, is the politics. And people don't realize that really, if they live in a democracy, they have the right to vote, but they also have a responsibility. And that is really not being used, I don't think, like it should be to make change, because politicians need to be elected in the next 4 years. So if everybody went against them, maybe they'd bend.
So the people are too obedient in some kind of way?
Too obedient or not motivated enough. They don't care deep enough, I think. I mean, if it was your garden that we were digging up to find oil or fracking in, or personally, then of course they get angry. But you know, it is there, each person has a responsibility to this. And to help people take their responsibility, be able to act. I think that is an important situation. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Now the next question is about cultural diplomacy. So how can cultural diplomacy be used to exchange ideas and best practices to promote environmental responsibility by governments and corporations?
Well, that's a big one, but it's obviously a very interesting subject that should be developed, and it's going to be people like you students who are educated in this, who really have to take the move. And again, we go back to the politicians, because if you use your knowledge to the public, as well as the politicians, as well as the media, you have to work globally. This has to be something that is holistic. I think one of the problems one notices is that too many people only focus on one subject. I'm a scientist, I'm a banker, I'm a this or that, a doctor, and they don't look from side to side, because if you think about it, the doctors, for example, doing research, they perhaps found something to save lives. That the banker is making $1 million by pushing a button. But because the doctor and the scientists have been so focused, they've never looked around and said, wait a minute, that's not fair. You know, give us some of that money to do what we want to do. And I think that's too much specialization. And maybe that's early education that's lacking. Too much put in a box and keeping in that box. And I think that's an important, obviously you're here because you're not in, you know, you want to think differently. But hopefully you can share that and do that, and it needs to be much bigger.
Mm-hmm. I think the next question is also related to that. Mm-hmm. How much influence can we as civil society exert on climate change and negotiations, and how can we pressure the youth to be more conscious about their future?
Well, the youth must also receive the knowledge to do it. I know I've had certain incidents people have told me about. For example, in Copenhagen, the youth were in COP16, I think it was. There was a whole group of youth outside a certain person's office, and he said, bring them in. The problem was they didn't have a spokesperson. They didn't dare come in. And I've heard this quite often with some of the Occupy and things. They haven't really got their wording together. They haven't got the press man, you know. And this is all to do with learning and being heard. Make yourself heard. And that's an important thing. And I think with cultural diplomacy, that's something one could spread, and with the press maybe, with what young people watch, with other people too. You know, a lot of people would like to do something, but they don't know how. I think that's something that on all generations, you know, they don't like the garbage in the street, but who do you go to? What do you do apart from picking it up yourself?
So on the one hand, education, and on the other hand, strengthen the youth by giving them a spokesperson.
Confidence, empower them is what we say. That's, I think it's a word you can't translate into some languages like French, but even in French now are using empower. They've decided it's a word, and I think empower not just young people, and all these associations who want to do things, make them feel they can be heard.
Now the final question is about international climate change regulations. So the question is, has the EU, the European Union, done enough to reduce their environmental footprint? And which continent do you consider to be the least environmentally responsible? And also, what can be done to encourage these continents to cooperate with climate change treaties and regulations?
Well, the EU is doing, but it's never enough. And of course, the other thing about the EU is if they all came together and did the same thing or did the right thing, we'd have more. There again, cultural diplomacy to help get the EU really to do these things, because one country says they're going to reduce by this, one is that. It should be across the board. You know, if you don't reduce, I don't know, you're out or you're fined or there's not enough perhaps. Perhaps we only do things if we're going to be punished if we don't do it. Maybe there's too much laxity and choice in this, I think, to get there. But, and as for the continent, I'm afraid I'm going to say the United States, because they are consuming a massive amount and not doing. And I think the worst thing is blocking, not signing Kyoto, not doing any of these things or producing new things. And again, of course, the people are ignorant. It's not the population in many places are very uninformed and don't feel they can change things, and or perhaps don't really realize. You know, that's
I think that's also important, to get the big players on board, and then also the people would be sooner conscious about their faith as well. Because as you see, the United States as the most powerful country doesn't sign these protocols or treaties, then...
But they won't sign unless the population is strong enough and says they want it signed. And this is, you know, how can you do that? Because you've firstly got those two divisions, you've got a strange sort of government and everybody's lobbying for what they want. But of course, maybe they consider, well, climate change doesn't really matter. It's, you know, it's not made by man was one thing the Bush government tried to produce, wasn't it? And it won't matter, we've got lots of more time and we can use it up. And I think probably the thinking was we can also go to that island in the space we're going to build and just leave everybody else down there. You know, this is some of the thinking. But again, it's I don't think you can blame the population, it's just they're not informed. So there we go back to education, sharing, learning. How can we do that?
Yeah. So you would recommend a sort of grassroots approach, that we have to encourage the population to demand more from their...
I think definitely. And I think one of the things, of course, now is that not enough people live on the land. Not enough people are close to nature. They're in the big cities. They don't really realize that, and they do suffer in a bad way, but they're not realizing that you're cutting, their trees are being cut down, their air is being polluted, the water's not clean, and so perhaps they're not taking those responsibilities, because what does it mean? One story I do know is that with the green maps that we talked about, in one area of New York, because it started in New York, there was a group of young children in a disfavored area, and they were going to pass 30,000 or 3,000 trucks a day with garbage down to the Hudson. And these little children made a map saying, no, you don't do it. And they didn't, they stopped it. So you see, it can happen.
Okay,
Examples.
thank you for your time, Mrs. Furey, and it was an honor and privilege to have you here with us today.
Thank you. It has been both an honor and a privilege, and wonderful to have an audience and listen to all these interesting people committed to the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, if we were a million, we'd be great, wouldn't we? But we just have to get a million on board.
True. Well said.
Or more than a million. Okay, millions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And bravo for what you're doing.